what I want to give here is a list of, or a set of comments that from WGSIP that I co-chair with Adam Skive, we think are important for DCPP as a CMIP contribution, and in particular for component C, especially for the discussion that will take place this afternoon and tomorrow morning. So the first point is about the grand challenge. So your question was what's the relevance of this, and right now the situation is very confusing. At the last Joint Scientific Committee, there was a breakout discussion in which Gökhan, Adam, and Masa as well probably participated. Masa as a member of the JSC committee, where this new grand challenge on decadal predictability was discussed. This new grand challenge is coming up because there is another grand challenge that is disappearing, and this is something that you can see here. This is the list of grand challenges. That the important thing in this WCRP organization is that they cut across the 4 core projects of WCRP: CLIC, CLIVAR, GeoX, and Spark. So a new grand challenge won't be a grand challenge for CLIVAR or a grand challenge for WGSIP, or it's a grand challenge of WCRP. So this is the first thing that we have to bear in mind. So it won't be a grand challenge based on component C. The second point is that to bear in mind when discussing about this is that grand challenges are expected to be very focused. They are fast track, at the fast track mean to get to a point that individually the core projects and the working groups cannot get. So defining the problem very clearly from the beginning and how the community thinks that this grand challenge can be achieved is fundamental for the grand challenge to be approved by the JSC. So they are expected to last around 5 years. If in 5 years nothing is coming out of the grand challenge, it will disappear. And that's what happened with the grand challenge on regional climate information. That's a grand challenge that is not anymore. So that's why it's like the parrot. It's basically a grand challenge that hasn't really delivered what the JSC was expecting, and that's why there is this idea of replacing it. So for the discussion today, the main issue is how this component C can contribute to defining a grand challenge that is focused and that is addressing a problem that cuts across all WCRP. So the situation is a bit more confusing than this, because the message that I get from Guy Brasseur and David Carlson is that they are not talking in terms of a decadal predictability grand challenge. They talk about a seasonal to decadal prediction grand challenge, which is even more confusing. I'm trying to clarify this thing with David Carlson, but that's irrelevant for the discussion here. Yeah.
Do they have a sense what is the deliverable?
It should be community-based. It's driven from the bottom. So it's basically the community who should say, it's only by working together, all these core projects and working groups, that we can do this thing, and we think this is important. We all have our own agendas, but that's where it gets really tricky. It's defining these 1 or 2 problems that we think are important to make progress.
Well, I mean, the first step would be a white paper or something, right?
Sure, yes. Yeah. So let me go to the second issue, which has to do with data and experiment description. And this is relevant for the whole DCPP, but in particular for component C. Yesterday, Eric described the activities of the WIP, which personally have the impression that as a community, we don't realize how important it is, what he was talking about, and how this can affect us. And I think it can be a very serious problem if we don't really tackle it from the beginning. So he talked about many different components of that are involved in the infrastructure: ESDoc, DRS, CMOR. CMOR is a library that many of you might have had something to do in the past. New version is is being developed, Seymour 3. And we know now that for DCPP we have specific requirements, and one of them is this double time axis that is mentioned here, which is necessary because we have basically two time, not dimensions, but two time coordinates. One is the start date, the other one is the forecast time. And we need this thing to avoid confusing really the data inside the simulation. This is absolutely indispensable. There are other attributes that we need to put into the netcdf files that identify our initialization. So by default, CMIP 5 was identifying each member or each initialization method with the RIP numbers. But this is not enough. We need much more, particularly when we know how sensitive our results are to the way we initialize things and how much we are going to change in the, during CMIP, this aspect of our experiments. So there are new attributes that within specs we are working towards, including in Seymour 3, which are the initialization methods, or something that I think it's very useful for component C, which is the associated experiment. This is a global attribute that will allow the people downloading the data to be able to associate which two experiments they have to compare, which is the control and which one is the AMO plus. So by default, we don't have a space, an official space to put these things in the netcdf files. We'll have this possibility with these modifications that we're introducing in Seymour 3. But it's important that people contributing seriously to component C can identify other things that we have to introduce. And if we don't do it, the WIP won't do it. That's something that Eric made very clear yesterday, but that has to be very clear to all of us. It's only by engaging all of us into this effort that things will happen. Otherwise, they won't happen. And I'm not talking here about documenting the models and all this, which is, it's again, more controversial. So for the discussion, it will be very important to identify individuals who can contribute to this discussion. Within DCPP, there's a small group of people who are working together in this issue, but it's not enough because Wolfgang and myself, we are not involved in component C or in certain aspects of component C. And remember that the list of data that we have selected for DCPP is very, very short. So if those working on component C expect to have variables specific for the diagnostics that you are planning to do, have a look now. In 2 years' time, it will be too late, and then you'll complain. So it's just something that we shouldn't underestimate. And the last thing has to do with a pure WGCP business. I don't know how component C can contribute to it. I'm sure that it can, but I don't know how it will contribute to it. Components A and B will play a role in this issue. It refers to two different initiatives that are taking place inside WCRP. One of them is a science project that is being promoted by WGCP to try to understand the reasons for the forecast drift. So our forecasts are drifting. The consequences of that drift are horrendous for our forecasts. An example here from a very nice paper from, written by Emilia Sanchez and Christophe and others at Fairfax, shows that, basically this is the forecast time, this is longitude, and I think this is a cross-section along the equator. Yeah, that's the equator, isn't it? And this is the drift of decadal forecasts. This goes up to year 4. In 2 different experiments, they use exactly the same model, same couple model, different initialization methodologies. I'm not going to say which one is best, but what we see is that although in both experiments we have a very strong warm bias in the first year of the forecasts, the drift, the evolution of the bias with the time is different in one experiment and the other. And the consequences of this is that the teleconnections that, for instance, we were talking about yesterday in the pacemaker experiments won't be valid anymore. They are not valid. They are completely irrelevant in this kind of context. I'm sorry to say it this way, but component C, the way it's been framed up to now is irrelevant for the prediction problem because of this. So how we are going to bring all this information together is a real challenge. And I think we have a great opportunity to make sense out of all this. And it's only by being together that we can really make use of all this information to improve our forecasts. So this science project from WGSIP is linked to another initiative that is promoted by the Working Group on Numerical Experimentation, WGNE, to move from transpose AMIP, that was the, one of the experiments, one of the components of CMIP5, to transpose CMIP, in which basically one would perform with the CMIP models short forecasts in couple mode initialized with the best initial conditions that we can provide. The reason behind this is that, at least in Europe and in other parts of the world, global weather forecasting centers are moving to making weather forecasting using couple models from day one. So from the first day, they'll use the couple model, and this is going to be a massive challenge because we don't know how to initialize these things properly. And they are going to be affected by the drift from day one. I don't know if any of you has looked at a weather forecast or a monthly forecast in the first 2 weeks, and how quickly the SST errors get set. In 2 weeks, you have errors, systematic errors of more than 1 degree in lots of places. That's really nasty. And we need to understand these things because we'll have to make forecasts and provide information. So that's basically what I had. I'm sorry, it's not a summary of what it was until now, but well, the basic idea is that I think these issues, in particular the data issue and the documentation, is something that we have to take seriously in the time that we have still here.
Good, thank you very much, Paco. I think it's all very relevant, Jerry.
So would a drift project be a candidate for component C? Or the drift project? Why not fold it into component C?
It depends on us. It depends on how we want to define it. But we'll have to get WGNE on board of this. We can't define this without having WGNE.
Well, yeah, but at the GSC, the discussion was that this drift project would kind of replace transpose CMIP, because it's the same idea, but in the decadal time prediction context, and they seem okay with that.
Yeah.
So, and the thing about drift is it really goes to the core of model error, initialization, all these things that we worry about, right?
Process understanding.
Yeah, process understanding.
But everybody's, I mean, this is not a new problem, right?
No,
And
it's,
I don't know if we have any new ways of looking at it.
Oh, there are new ways. There are people doing really, really clever and interesting things.
Well, whether or not it belongs at this stage in our work is another question. But I mean, we can bring this up this afternoon.
Yeah, just a short comment on this one. This really depends on the time scale you're looking at. I think that when you're looking at seasonal decadal, you get completely different setup, ways of looking at things. You can have the overall same strategy, but so I'm not sure you can blend all those different time scales together in a common framework, just to follow on Jerry's. But no,
Yeah, it's not complex. It's quite a complex thing, yes.
And it's really specific to the drift, to the model, to the area you're looking at. I mean, but it's very exciting. I agree with it. No, I also wanted to comment on what Paco was saying on the data, and I think this is really important. I mean, there are many of us already part of CMIP groups, and they are in contact. They receive emails coming from the WIP, and they're aware of all this, and the centers are being organized towards that. But I guess what Paco is saying, and I'm saying as well, is if your group is not yet hooked up with CMIP, or hasn't been in CMIP 5, you should be really today engaging really closely and strongly, because this is a major effort. And those that went through it in CMIP 5 know it. Those that haven't cannot even imagine the beginning of it. So it's really
underestimated.
clearly underestimated. Yeah. So this is really important. So if you know your group is not, or you're not aware of who in your group is in contact with the CMIP and the WIP, etc., be active. This is really important. The last thing on the documentation, for the documenting the experiments, we're going to change the way we do it in CMIP 6 compared to CMIP 5. Now it will come automatically from the files. So whatever is documented in the headers or the attributes in the file will be what is documented for everybody. So it's really important to get it right. You won't have a chance to change it afterwards. Because otherwise the overhead for people to document is just too much, so we have to automate a number of things. That's the way of doing it.
Yeah. CMOD 3 seems to be much more modular and more flexible than CMOD 2 was.
Yeah, the tools are improving every day.
Okay, any last burning questions? Yes, points?
So just those of you who don't understand these grand challenges, so WCRP developed these over a couple-year time period, and the ones that kind of made it to the end basically had to have at least a couple of people that agreed to take on a lot of work. So the one I've been peripherally involved with, because WGCM was kind of the sponsor of it, is the one on clouds, climate, and circulation. So just give me an idea of how this is set up. So there are 2 lead coordinators, Sandrine Bonine and Bjorn Stevens. Then there are 5 initiatives. One on climate and hydrological sensitivity, one on leveraging past record, one on coupling clouds and circulations, one on changing patterns, one on more reliable models. Each one of those has 2 leads. Each of those initiatives then has a list of experiments that they devise or devising to run through the community. All this is encapsulated in a number of large documents. So to actually do, you just don't say, okay, decadal climate prediction is a new initiative, or is a new grand challenge. There's a huge amount of work that goes on behind it. And so these grand challenges have all been in development for a couple of years now, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. So that's just giving you an idea of kind of the scale of the effort that's involved. If the decadal community takes this on, a lot of people probably in this room are going to have to do a lot of work. Just for some background.
Now I'm understanding the disadvantages. So what are the advantages?
Well, the advantages are that you can marshal a lot of resources internationally, supposedly, because it's part of this WCRP Grand Challenge. So you can go to your governments and say, look, we want to do this experiment. We have a proposal. We want to get it funded. It's going to be part of the Grand Challenge. And you can get a lot of work done. And that's kind of the reason for WCRP, is to provide this international framework, these projects that the international community thinks is important, and you can go to your government with a grant proposal and say, look, this is, and of course the funding agencies are aware of these things, and they say, okay, this looks like a great idea because you're plugging into this international activity that seems to be sanctioned. It gives you credibility, and in theory then you can get funding to do things that you wouldn't normally do.
I mean, more visibility and accelerated, perhaps, development.
Yeah.
But I mean, prediction, how can you do that in 5 years?
Well, or how can you do any of these grand challenges in 5 years? That's kind of
Delivered in 5 years.
I mean, the reason regional kind of went down was they couldn't quite decide among that community what that really meant. So there was the Cordex experiment, which is a regional, embedded regional model experiment. There's climate services, and nobody quite knows what that is. A lot of people had different ideas about what they thought regional information should be and what it should be doing, and it was just kind of not really moving along. So they decided, well, maybe it was too early to try to do that, and let's maybe decadal, everybody's talking about decadal, so maybe that would be a good one. And that's kind of the level, and then there was more discussion. Masi, you're a JC member. Is that kind of what happened in your memory?
Also, the WCRP administrative perspectives that try to set up the grand challenge, and WCRP wants to sell that the research is relevant to the external people. So that's not only the scientific goals, but also some outreach, outcome type of the things that are required for
Okay.